We are live.
All right. Dr. Evans, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, I will. Dr. Blanton?
Present.
Dr. Bullock? Dr. Dempsey?
Morning, Tom and Andrew.
Is that Dr. Dempsey?
I think Dr. Dempsey's in the Teams meeting. I'm sending him over.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tomerlin. Dr. Fleming? Ms. Janeski? Dr. Graham?
Present.
Dr. Houston?
Present.
Dr. Locklear?
Here.
Dr. Marr? Dr. Miller?
Present.
Dr. Penfield?
Present.
Superintendent Truitt?
Here.
Ms. Floyd?
Present.
Dr. Holland?
Present.
Dr. Weddington?
Here.
Dr. Wood?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Patton?
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the January 13th, 2021 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs and licensure. My name is Patrick Miller, and I serve as chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. I now call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the January 13th, 2022 meeting?
So moved, Connie.
Seconded.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion and a second to approve today's agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Thank you, everybody.
Chairman Miller, who was the first motion?
Connie?
Connie. And who was the second motion? I'm sorry.
Van.
Thank you, Van.
Yep. All right, the minutes from our previous commission meeting on December 9th, 2021 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thanks,
Second,
Sam.
Marcy.
Have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Now, Dr. Tom Tomberlin will present the NCDPI and State Board updates. Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Good afternoon, Pepsi board members. I want to take a brief few minutes here to review with you what was discussed at the previous State Board of Education meeting and any decisions that might have been made. Here comes our PowerPoint. So in its January meeting, the board approved the job description for mental health consultants in the LEAs. These are different than school psychologists or school counselors. They provide clinical services to students in the school setting. Many of the districts expressed a need for this position given their response to COVID and helping students reacclimate to the face-to-face learning environment. So this has been created as a classified position. This is why it didn't come before Pepsi. It's not a licensed position, but it leverages occupational licenses that allow for clinical services by the state. So we're leveraging the occupational licenses to create a classified position here. The descriptions and job duties are listed, as well as the salary grade for this position, which runs from about $34,000 a year to $60,000 a year. And I'm happy to take any questions that any of you might have on this.
Hey, Tom, this is Hank. Do we have a contact person at DPI or at the state somewhere for this?
So this is managed through our Healthy Students. I do believe that Ellen Essex is the director of that initiative. So she would be the primary contact for questions about this role in the school.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think we're done with that one, Kim, if we want to move to the next item. So Pepsi members, Dr. Miller and I presented to the State Board of Education kind of a refresher of the work of the Human Capital Roundtable. As you all, I am not going to go over this presentation as you all are deeply involved in this work and understand what the rationale behind the work is and what our progress is to date. I did want to let you all know that Dr. Miller and I did present to the State Board on this, on the work that's ongoing in these subcommittees. We just limited this to an overview for the board in January with the promise that we would come back in a future meeting. I think we tentatively scheduled March to come back with a more comprehensive update to the work that's being done. As you know, we have paused the subcommittees to give DPI staff time to incorporate all the decisions that have been made, as well as kind of developing some, filling in some of the gaps between the work of the subcommittees. We will be presenting this back to Pepsi kind of as a straw man for folks to just kind of see the entire model kind of laid out and how it interacts, with the understanding that the subcommittees would then pick up the work and say, you know, we want to change this or change that. So more editing work moving forward rather than the generative work that we've been engaged in. So I'm happy to take any questions on that presentation that Dr. Miller and I presented, or any questions about how we're moving forward. Great, hearing none. Dr. Evans, I think I have one more. Yes.
Yep.
So this last item was related to the teacher compensation and advanced teaching roles RFP that we conducted. In the recent budget bill, we had additional funds added to this program, $2 million. And so those of you who are unaware of this, the advanced teaching roles is some flexibility that districts receive to develop programs for increased, more advanced roles for teachers, career roles for teachers in the schools without taking them out of the classroom. If you want to think about this as strongly related to our license for advanced roles, the classroom excellence and the adult leadership roles, these are programs that are currently underway in many of our districts across the state. And so our office supports the development of these roles and the grant funds that flow out to districts to support these roles. So we thought that the commission would be very interested in how these are progressing and the new districts that are coming on board, because these are basically implementation zones for what we're planning to do with our licensure reform work. So we did get additional funding from the legislature, and I'll just briefly go over the proposals that were submitted. We received 5 proposals. We can go ahead and skip down to the. We received 5 proposals. We set an 80% approval rate or score for recommendation to the board. You can see that 4 of the proposals met that mark, and so we have recommended those 4 proposals to the board. The next slide shows their funding requests, and that's a total project over 3 years, and then we have the requested amount per year. That $988,000 before the budget passed, we did not have sufficient funds to cover that. But given the extra $2 million, we do now have the ability to fully fund these 4 programs, which we're very excited about. And then that $2 million appropriation is for this fiscal year, so we had to find ways to spend that money. And one of the ways, and so let's go to the next slide, Kim, and just show folks how we're using that money. Great. So one of the first things we did was we had a cohort back in 2020 that we couldn't fully fund. So we're going to use some of this money, this $2 million appropriation, to go back and fund those programs at their full request. And so you can see there where that we had a $234,000 shortfall. So we went back and our intent is to go back and make up the difference that we weren't able to fully fund them over the past 2 years. And then because one of the concerns here is this $2 million has to be spent before June 30th, 2022, or it reverts back to the state. So these districts are in a position to spend that money in a timely manner. And then next, we proposed, so here's the funding option. Option 1 is what we have recommended to the State Board of Education. For those 4 proposals that we showed you, we're proposing to provide $650,000 in planning funds for this year. And then there's the reconciliation for the 2020 grantees that makes them whole for their request. Additionally, we have 8 schools that are in prior cohorts that currently do not receive state funding anymore, but the legislation allowed them to renew for another 3 years. So we're proposing to give those 8 districts $75,000 to continue to support their program. And then we've worked in some money for evaluation of the program and its impact. And then moving forward, this is the 2021 cohort won't actually implement until 22-23. So there's their funding for that for the year, and then that adjustment, and then funds for renewing programs, and the planning funds for the grantees that we will select in the 23 school year, and that expends that $2.5 million that will be available in 22-23 fiscal year. And I'm happy to take any questions on that program. I hope you all are kind of keeping an eye on this, and certainly we can bring information about these programs and how they're structured to the subcommittee meetings, because it it is kind of the model that we're thinking of with those advanced teacher roles in the licensure reform work.
Okay. Any questions? All right. Thank you for those updates, Dr. Tomberlin. You're still on deck. You're for 2 policy amendments, LICN 006, the experience and degree credit for salary purposes, and the LICN 002, routes to licensure for pre-K teachers.
Great. So as Dr. Evans is bringing this up, this policy is related to experience credit for our MSA interns. In the past, we granted a year of experience to the principal fellows for their internship, but not those folks, those full-time interns that were not part of the principal fellows program. So we've gone back to the policy to amend the policy to provide a year of experience. 1 full year of experience shall be awarded to MSA interns who meet the following criteria. They were enrolled in an approved EPP as a full-time MSA student. That's the trigger for them to receive the paid stipend. And then secondly, they complete a 10-month internship in a public school unit and receive a state-funded stipend. So those are the 2 conditions under which we would grant a year of experience for the MSA internship work. So I want to kind of forestall a question, but hopefully this will lead to some discussion. Currently, those teachers, those educators who are enrolled in an MSA program part-time and are doing a part-time internship would not qualify for a year of experience credit because in most cases they are working a full-time job in the school and already gaining a year of experience. So we can't award a year of experience twice for folks, but that's the situation in most cases. But there is the possibility that somebody could be on a leave of absence but doing an unfunded full-time internship. And that's certainly a discussion for this committee as to whether we should write the policy to include those folks, even if they're not receiving it, if they're doing a full-time internship but not receiving state funding. And I'm happy to take any questions, or Dr. Miller, I don't know if we want to open that up for discussion.
Sure. Any questions?
Tom, can you repeat those last couple comments you made about those who may not be receiving a state-funded stipend and doing a full-time internship?
Right. So there is the possibility that somebody could be doing an MSA program part-time, and then when it comes time for the internship, they do take a leave of absence and elect to do the internship on a full-time basis. They would not qualify for a state funding, but we would not, under this policy, we would not grant them a year of experience for that work because the policy reads that they have to be state funded. And so I am surfacing this kind of hole in the policy to make sure that Pep-C is aware that if we had in a situation where somebody was doing a full-time internship that wasn't funded by the state, they would not be eligible for that year of experience for that internship. And we can certainly take your direction on whether that should be the case or it should not be the case to provide that year of experience.
Tom, just another follow-up question. Do we have folks in the state that are doing full-time or full-time MSA students who are not doing state-funded internships? I'm just not certain who all gets the stipends and who doesn't. I was thinking there was a lottery of X number of stipends or X amount that goes out to each EPP, and I just need more clarification on that as well.
Yes. So currently, So let me give you a little historical context here. The stipends used to be reserved for students that were involved in either principal fellows or what we call the TP3, the Transforming Principal Preparation Program. That was a grant program, that is a grant program across the state. And historically, we've only provided state stipends to those folks. But the law allows anyone who completes a full-time MSA program, who does that on a full-time basis, that anyone that does that is eligible for the stipend. And so we've expanded the pool of people who are eligible for that stipend. So that's why we're going back right now to change this policy to make it more generic and not limited to those principal fellows. To your question of, is it usual that somebody does a part-time internship and then does a full-time internship? And the answer to that question is no, that is not usual. Most people who do a part-time internship are retaining employment while they do that, the coursework. And then when they enter the internship period, they're doing that on a part-time basis as well. However, the reason I bring it up is, as of yesterday, I received a call from a potential candidate that was seeking funding, and they were part-time completers. So they did their MSA program on a part-time basis. That means they're not eligible for state funding, but this person has elected to take a leave of absence from their teaching position and do the internship on a full-time basis. Now, I'm prevented by statute from funding that person's internship, but the question now is, would that person get a year of experience? And I had to tell him no, that under our current policy, he would not be eligible for a year of experience because he's not being compensated or is not receiving the stipend during that internship. So it's unusual, but I wanted to make sure that I was fully disclosing that there is at least one situation where this is the case, and want to make sure you're all aware of that. And we craft the policy according to your full knowledge of the situation in the field.
Other
Tom,
questions?
this is Ann. I have a clarifying question.
Sure.
Tom, are they paid at the teacher rate or administrator rate for the internship?
That's a great question. So the legislation, this is very good news. The legislation recently provided a hold harmless provision. So they are paid at the first year AP salary or the salary they would have been entitled to had they taught in that year. So we do the calculations. We look at every applicant for the stipend, and we determine whether which is the greater salary, their teaching salary or the AP salary. This allows us to attract more experienced teachers into the internship because they're held harmless on their salary, and they're not going backward during the internship in terms of salary. They're not going backward in salary.
Thank you. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Tom, is it possible as part of this that we look at for those individuals like you just identified, local district chooses to pay them during their internship if the state funding is not available, but a local district chooses to do it, that individual could apply for experience credit as non-teaching, relevant non-teaching, similar to what we do with some states that have permanent substitutes. You know, generally we don't approve substitute, on-call substitute experience, but there are some states who have permanent subs. Right. And if we get it documented that it was a permanent full-time by their employer, we experience credit for them. I wonder if that would be an option here for those people whose districts choose to pick up and pay for their internship.
I think it is possible. So the awarding of experience credit is on the license is under the purview of the State Board of Education. And so there's no statutory provision that prevents us from allowing that. So that's why I want Pepsi to be aware that we could provide some pathway. And I think you're right that if we need to distinguish between if you're interning at no salary, then that becomes a little problematic for granting a year of experience. But even if the locals were providing a stipend to the intern, that could possibly give us a trigger for granting that experience credit. So that's why I would like Pepsi to discuss this and decide if that is how you would like to amend this policy recommendation to present to the State Board of Education.
So I'm new to this, but I would like for us to consider that as an amendment. We also do that for some other, like student services personnel who have to complete a year-long internship. We hire them.
Right.
And during their internship, they're getting experience credit. They're earning retirement service credit because they're being paid just like employees. I would like for our admin interns to not be able to take advantage of at least getting the step of experience credit for that. So I'm sorry, I'm a novice at how to recommend an amendment for that, but I would like to propose it as an amendment for it to be added to the non-teaching experience credit if it's a paid internship.
So Chairman Miller, does that constitute a motion?
We're going to call that a motion.
Okay.
Thank you both for your patience with me.
Well, yeah, what she said. So I think what I hear is that Dr. Holland has made a motion to amend the policy to allow for the process she described to be added for those exceptions as she described. Does that work?
Can I ask a clarification of Marcy's motion, please?
Sure.
Sure.
Hope I can answer.
Does your motion, Zan, does your motion include state-funded or LEA-funded stipends?
It would only, this is already amending, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, this already allows, if they're state funded, for them to get credit. It's for those that are non-state funded, but are being paid for their internship by some other means. It could be a grant, it could be local.
Right.
But if it's a paid internship that the employer certifies, like non-teaching experience, so it's
it does that.
The employer has to be part of the process.
Yeah, okay, so that answers my question. I just want to make sure that's what I was hearing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Could I ask, this is Sam Houston, could I ask one question?
Sure.
Did I hear that this allows for that to happen or is required for it to be the case?
The motion would allow for it to happen.
So one situation is they might get that consideration, in another they may not.
That I think they would have to apply for it. Is that correct, Dr. Holland and Dr. Tomberlin?
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes,
the LEA
would have to apply for non-teaching experience credit, and it would be treated the same way.
Right.
Okay, I'm good.
So just to clarify to everyone here, what the way I am envisioning this is, according to Dr. Holland's motion, we would add a third criterion, and that would be completes a 10-month internship in a public school unit and receives a stipend from a funding source other than the state.
Okay. Good. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second. It's Wesley.
Thank you, Wesley. So that's a motion and a second for amending LICN 006. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. I think we're ready to go to LICN 002.
I think we have one more small but substantive issue in this, and this is graduate degrees. And this is this has been a longstanding error that I don't think anybody has cost anybody anything, but we noticed it when we were reviewing this policy. This is for graduate pay for teachers and student support personnel who complete a degree at the master's 6-year doctoral level. They must have either, and we need to fix the either there, Kim, because that suggests the or. They completed at least one course towards the master's. No, Kim, this is wrong. Dr. Miller, we'd like to disregard this because for right now, we will bring this back. We need to do a little more research on this. The law says and, but I know the law does also say either here. So we need to figure out, we need to look into this a little more. So we will hold this and we will amend it with the other emendation for next month and come back to this.
Okay. So we're going on LICNO02?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is to address a concern from the field. The language regarding North Carolina pre-K teachers in non-public settings. So this is not our teachers in pre-Ks that are affiliated with a public school unit. These are pre-K teachers that are in a DHHS supervised pre-K setting. And those teachers are licensed. So they do seek pre-K licensure from the State Board of Education. The policy references is applicable to lateral entry. And we wanted to make sure that that was updated to reflect the residency model, which is the evolution of the lateral entry process. As you know, lateral entry is sunsetting completely on 6/30/2022. So the policy is just updating to reflect a new alternative route to licensure. And then it clarifies what a non-public setting is. And so we're just specifying that it is a school setting that is not under the authority of the North Carolina State Board of Education. We didn't want to reference DHHS specifically because there may be folks in non-public settings that are not under DHHS that are seeking licensure. But in any case where folks are seeking that pre-K licensure and they're in a non-public setting, we will work with them through the DCDEE to support their request for licensure. And I'm happy to take any questions on that.
This is Ann. I have just a quick question on this. Do we have an example of another non-public setting? Or are you just saying in the future there may be one? It's just a clarifying question.
No, I do think there are, so most of them fall under this DCDEE, which is a subdivision of DHHS. And so, but I always try to avoid the unforeseen exception to that rule that causes us pain. And so basically what we're saying is as long as any non-public school works through DCDEE, we will support their path to licensure. But regardless of whether the school is under the purview of DHHS or not, they have to work through that particular division that's listed in the policy in order to seek the licensure. So that's the conduit through which they can seek licensure. And I'm just trying to make it very generic so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we inadvertently excluded some block of schools that wouldn't technically qualify.
Okay, that answers. Thank you.
Great.
All right, do we have a motion to approve these changes?
I move to approve. This is Randy.
Marcy.
All right, who
Second,
moved to
Randy.
approve? Was that Randy?
Yeah, Randy.
Randy started, and Marcy, was that you on the second?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a motion and a second to approve the recommended changes to LICN 002. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approving the changes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Tomlin. You're still in the hot seat, though, Dr. Tomlin. I think you're going to present recommendations from stakeholders around the principal licensure for discussion and potential action. But I remind commission members that any recommendations from the commission would be under consideration by the state board as they discuss principal licensure requirements to be sent to the General Assembly.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Miller. Yes, and so I'd like to reiterate that this is not really a policy recommendation. This is a recommendation for changes to statute. And so this is a little different, but we wanted to make sure that we brought the voice of the field and all external stakeholders to this body in advance of making that formal recommendation to the State Board of Education. So we have discussed this before, so I'm going to be very brief in reviewing the issues. Next slide, please. So there are, here are the major issues that we're facing with the legislation, where we're out of compliance currently, and we've surveyed the field to see what their best recommendations are for addressing these. And the first is to pass the licensure exam adopted by the State Board of Education. We know that the principal licensure exam was removed in August 2011. And so we need to, we're seeking feedback from the field as to whether we should select a licensure exam for principals or not. The second issue is to require all candidates to complete a year-long internship with the idea that NCDPI would need to formally define what a year-long internship is. We have precedent here with 10 months for our state-funded internship, but there's also the consideration of how part-time program completers would complete this requirement. Next. Prerequisite to candidate for principal, a classroom teacher. I want to be very clear that when the law references a classroom teacher, that's to the exclusion of instructional support personnel or administrators. They are included in a broad definition of teacher, but classroom teacher has this specific meaning of an academic license in a classroom setting. So they have to have achieved the second level of differentiation of the license. That is interpreted as holding a CPL, have at least 4 years of classroom teaching experience, and possess at least a master's degree in educator administration. So those three requirements, the second level of differentiation would exclude principal candidates, of whom we have many that have not converted their teaching license to a CPL. Have 4 years of classroom teaching experience would exclude all instructional support personnel. That is your school counselors, your school social workers, your school psychologists, and other support roles. And possess at least a master's degree in education administration, which would essentially eliminate a licensure-only program for principals in the state. So those are the three requirements in law that have immense impact on our principal pipeline moving forward. So here are the stakeholder recommendations. We surveyed the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force. That is a group of HR directors and superintendents from the 8 educational regions across the state. Principal Advisory Group, that is a group of principals convened by the state superintendents, Mr. Tavari Wallace, who is the Principal engagement. I can't think of the.
Principal engagement advisor to the superintendent.
Excellent. Thank you, Superintendent Drew. North Carolina Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, which is in CACTE. So those were the groups that we surveyed, and here are the recommendations from those stakeholder groups. Licensure exam. So these are the questions that we put to these groups. And I'm assuming that you guys had a chance to review those, and let's just get to the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force. Again, this is HR directors and superintendents. They unanimously agreed to a year-long internship. For part-time program candidates, provide additional option to hold a provisional license and serve as an assistant principal for a year. So where the person gets hired on a provisional license and does a year as an AP, we would count that towards the internship. Full-time program candidates, paid internship, post-course work. We do have that currently. Out-of-state principals have at least 1 year of experience as a principal or assistant principal or completed an internship in another state. So basically, for out-of-state principals, we'll just look to see if they're licensed in the other state and whether they completed an internship or have at least 1 year of experience in order to grant them a license. Licensure exam, unanimously agreed to no licensure exam. Prefer performance-based instead of paper and pencil exam. So the feedback here was it is the internship that is the more important indicator of future success. And the licensure exam really would not serve that purpose in kind of weeding out candidates that are not prepared. Teaching experience, complete 4 years of experience in a school plus holding a CPL if applicable. So essentially, let me clarify this. This would open this up to any licensed any licensed school employee with 4 years of experience would qualify to hold the principal license. So it is expanding that to include those instructional support folks. If the candidate is a teacher, holds a teaching license, then the CPL must convert it to a CPL. Out-of-state teacher who holds a license for 4 or more years to work in a school from another state and completed 4 years of experience in a school may be eligible for a principal license. That's the way that should read, I think. Masters in School Administration. So they agree that we should allow for licensure only, but only where the licensure only program covers the full set of standards. So in some analysis we did and working with the EPPs, we found that some of the licensure only programs truncated the program. So they might have left off courses related to different aspects of the principal standards. In order to have a licensure only program, you have to demonstrate that you are covering all the standards of all the principal standards that are issued by the state in that program. And so that was the recommendation from the Recruitment and Retention Task Force. The Principal Advisory Group, again, this is Mr. Tabari Wallace leading this group, Special Advisor on Principal Engagement to the State Superintendent. They recommend keep the 10-month internship, but making 10-month enriched experience where it is continuous, not necessarily the beginning of the school year. I think what they're getting at is the recognition that in the summer, the 10-month internship generally follows the teacher 10-month schedule, but this group was particularly concerned that the summer that summer experience has lots of principal administrative duties that may not be captured by the regular internship, and they wanted to explore ways that summer work could be captured in addition to the traditional academic year. Suggested hour equivalency for year-long internship at 1,000 hours. So in other words, if you're a part-time completer and doing a part-time internship, instead of holding them to 10 months, what we do is we hold them to an hourly equivalent, which is 1,000 hours. Part-time MSA internships would need to complete the hourly requirement. Internship pay include full monthly salary for all interns. So they're recommending that even if you're doing the internship on a part-time basis, that you be compensated, you receive a stipend for that. There's some implications for that, given that in most cases, those folks are full-time employees. So we would have to consider some kind of stipend there or look at dual employment issues. Principal mentor requirement, that these folks be placed with a mentor that is deemed effective at the school site, and consider an option for multi-grade level experience during the internship. This was surfaced with our teacher recruitment and retention task force as well. A formal recommendation didn't come from them, but the concern is that principal candidates may do an internship in one type of school and may not get the experience of, let's say, a middle school or a high school, and but they may very well get an assignment as their first principal assignment may be in a school in which they had no experience, either in the internship or as an assistant principal. Licensure exam, they do not support the licensure exam. They support utilizing the portfolios that are created as part of the MSA programs for most of our EPPs. And they recommend aligning that portfolio with rubric to standardize across all of our EPPs and require across the board to represent being highly prepared for a first-time intern principalship as part of that portfolio. Chairman Miller, could I have a at my door real quick? Oh, okay. That's okay. All right, the next item was, sorry. For teaching experience, the principal advisory group recommended 3 years of teaching experience. Any certified personnel holding a CPL, if applicable, should be eligible to hold a principal license. The reason I keep saying if applicable is student support personnel do not have an IPL CPL structure to their licensure. So in that case, they would need to hold the license, not a provisional, a clear license, and have 3 years of experience in their role. MSA, a master's would be required, but not exclusively an MSA. Could complete a licensure only program if a master's degree has been earned. They did not stipulate the full coverage of standards in this feedback group. In CACTI, so we had 20 of 23 EPPs with an approved principal prep program. So that was an 87% response rate. The recommendation is no licensure exam, year-long internship, a minimum of 2 semesters, or complete 300 to 500 hours. Teaching experience, including teachers and support service personnel, to pursue a principal license. I don't see a number there on the recommended years of experience there, but then Masters of School Administration, hold a master's degree as a minimum requirement, include postmasters add-on programs that lead to principal licensure. And that's the result of the survey. And so, Chairman Miller, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, so it's up to us as a commission to determine if we want to send recommendations for the state board to consider. As you heard Dr. Tomlin say, this is not a policy issue, so they really can take or leave our recommendations, but if you want to send, if the commission desires to send recommendations to the state board, we can do that. So I would ask, what is the pleasure of the commission?
Superintendent Miller, if I may, this is Marcy. We've been having lots of discussions in and among PANC members and even outside of the Recruitment and Retention Task Force, where most of our colleagues provided input. Thank you for that opportunity on behalf of the whole organization and districts. to Tom and his team for managing that. It's like wrangling a herd of cats, literally, on some instances. But I have heard from some members of the field who would like for us to consider, as part of our recommendations, some recommendations to the state board to look at how we may license out-of-state candidates who are coming to us as veterans who may have taken a test for their teaching area many, many moons ago, when those of us like me who took the old NTE version. And these are not elementary ed or special education. So it's not the reading and math subcomponents that are required by the statute, but that they took their state's test at the time. In one particular instance, that test was the same one North Carolina was requiring in that year. Yet that veteran principal, who actually is a retiree from a neighboring state, who's coming across the line to work in one of our northeastern districts, is now being held to a test, and it seems unreasonable. And I don't know if that can be part of this recommendation, since we're looking at recommendations around school administrator licensure. But we're not able to adequately recruit for administrators in many of our districts because of things like that. If they're being held to a test and they just started, they're not grandfathered under the current grandfathering that we have. It's a challenge for some of our districts, particularly the smaller districts who aren't able to recruit adequate numbers of APs.
Okay, question for Dr. Tomberlin. If the legislature changes the statute to no licensure exam, would that take care of that, Dr. Tomberlin?
No. So this is a great point, Dr. Holland, and I'm glad you raised it. I know what Dr. Holland's talking about, but I want to make sure that I provide the full context so everybody's clear about the situation here. So with our licensure system, the way that the law is set up currently and probably proposed for the future is that one cannot hold a principal license in isolation. There has to be a foundational license, teaching license, or student support license that is the foundation upon which the administrator license is built. So that's important to understand in the context of the issue she's raising. In the case of out-of-state applicants with their underlying teaching license, if the candidate took a test in the state that was approved by the state at the time they issued the license, we will honor that in North Carolina with one notable exception: elementary education. And this is a policy decision that the State Board of Education held fast on, is that the candidate, and is in legislation actually, the candidate must have, in the case of elementary, a subtest in math and reading that meets the standard. And if it was from out of state, it has to be a clear subtest of math and reading where they passed both those subtests. And so we have to hold, especially elementary candidates, to that rule. Now, if they have a clear subtest of math and reading from another state, we'll accept it. But in the case that Dr. Holland's describing, these generic tests that were used back in the day did not have these subtests. So these candidates have to come to North Carolina and they have to demonstrate proficiency on a subtest of math and reading. If they're experienced, as Dr. Holland suggests, there are courses, they're not easy courses, they're quite intensive courses that one could do in lieu of the test. But unless that requirement is completed, then the underlying license is in jeopardy, and therefore the principal license is also in jeopardy. And that's the issue. That's a huge issue in all this, is whether there has to be a valid, maintained current teacher license underneath this principal license to support the addition of the MSA, of the principal license. I hope that makes sense to everybody, and I'm happy to answer any questions to clarify. It's a complicated problem.
Sam Houston, a quick question. If I'm a superintendent and I hire an out-of-state person to administer a middle school or a high school, and then later in my district I need to make some reassignments, would that, if I understand what you're saying, that person would not be eligible to be reassigned as administrator of the elementary school?
If you hired
am I asking the right question? Go ahead.
So they would be eligible for reassignment, because I'm assuming if you hired an out-of-state person as a principal, then at the time you hired them, you also that person applied for North Carolina license and was granted a North Carolina principal license. So if that's the condition on which this question's being asked, yes. If we issued the principal license, that person would be eligible to be for reassignment. I think the question here is, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think you're going to clarify. Sounds like to me that if you went that route, would that eliminate the necessity that they stand for those two examinations?
No, they wouldn't be able to get the principal's license in the first place, because they wouldn't have the two subtests if they were licensed as a teacher in elementary.
So, but I think there's some nuance to what Dr. Houston's asking, and let me see if I can hit at it, Dr. Houston. So I'm an out-of-state principal with a elementary teaching license that applies to be in North Carolina. North Carolina will grant them both the elementary license at the IPL level and the principal license. The IPL assumes that the principal will complete any requirements on that underlying license within the 3 years that they're given for an IPL. So I came in, I didn't have a subtest of math and reading, but we granted them the IPL. That principal would have 3 years to meet that requirement, or the elementary license is in jeopardy. If the elementary license expired, then the principal's license would also become null and void because it doesn't have foundation. And in that case, Dr. Houston, that person would no longer be eligible to hold the current position he or she is holding, nor would he or she be eligible to transfer to a different assignment.
Okay. Just one more, one more difficulty in getting people into North Carolina. And I'm not saying it isn't important.
Sure.
I just see it as, one more
barrier.
Yep. And particularly for our border counties.
And
so
to
anyway,
be clear, I'm sorry, Dr. Whitten.
Go ahead.
No, I'm through.
For our individuals who aren't elementary, to Tom's point, that's where it gets really complicated, and the frustration is exponential by comparison to other things because of that, but we all understand, we work through it. It's these non-elementary areas that to some degree the barriers are being applied as well, when they really don't have to be, if we can address it, if we can handle it. I get the subtest for reading and math for elementary foundational, development for students. I get it. But if it's PE, or if it's secondary social studies, or if it's middle school science, why are we holding a 28-year veteran from Virginia who's applied to be an assistant principal and his foundational teaching area was PE, and he took the NTE for PE that, ironically, back then Virginia required the same test North Carolina requests for a PE license. So if he were a North Carolina graduate, this would be an issue. But anyway, why are we doing that? Why is that not something that we can fix?
So, Dr. Holland, I'm confused by that because our stance on any license outside of elementary education is if it was the test of record for the license at the time the individual was granted the license, we will accept it in North Carolina.
Okay, then I'll reach out separately or have the district that reached out to me reach out separately because they were told by a member of the staff at DPI that the person had to take the North Carolina test.
All right, yeah, so
for PE.
Yeah, I'm happy to address any of those policy issues specifically. But my understanding of the policy is that that situation, and now if there's no test, that's a different situation. If they were come from a time, and we do have veteran teachers that do come from this time where no licensure exam was in place, then they would be held to North Carolina's test. But if they have a test of record that was the qualifying test at that time in that state, then we will accept that, except in elementary and elementary ECGC.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chairman Miller, this is Randy.
Sure.
Just backing up a bit to, I think, a prior question of would Pepsi be inclined to present recommendations? I would certainly endorse that. I hope we would. And I'm wondering about a process for that and what timeline we're on and whether, for example, a subcommittee could be formed. I'm wondering if there's contextual information around those items that could be presented.
Can you let us know the timeline, Dr. Tomberlin?
Sure. So I appreciate that, Dr. Penfield. So as far as context, we can deliver that in truckloads. So yes, happy to do that. The issue of timeline. So the waiver that has basically grandfathered everybody in who's licensed prior to July 1st, 2021. That's taken care of everybody who's been before. All the licenses July 1st to 2021, issued July 1st, 2021 and later, those are conditionally waived. So, but until August of 2022. So given that, so our thinking is these recommendations have to come to short session in order for us to get anything passed in time for schools that in the 2022-23 academic year know the requirements for their candidates going in. Now, some of your 2022-23 cohort will be under the waiver because the law is you have to complete one course towards the MSA by August 31st, 2022. So you will have some folks that in that cohort that do summer and they could get a course under their belt and they're under the waiver. But if you've got folks coming in fresh on the fall semester, they would not be covered under the waiver. So the timeline, August 31st, 2022 may seem like a long time away, but it's very short in terms of you EPP folks being able to advise your candidates of what the requirements they have for getting the license are.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Tomberlin. I guess that's really helpful. What I was thinking is in terms of recommendations, there's a lot of information here and recommendations on a variety of points. And so that's where I was wondering if we did have time to engage in a process of something like a subcommittee that could help aggregate this information that's coming in and other input and present it back to Pepsi, something along those lines. So that's where my question was coming from, is do we have time to engage in a process of that nature?
I would say, and Dr. Tomlin, you can give your opinion, but if you wanted to do a subcommittee, have a subcommittee look at these recommendations, they would have to be back in front of Pepsi, preferably in February, but I think no later than March, so that the state board could have them to consider before short session begins in May. You agree with that, Dr. Tomberlin?
It's very tight, but yes, I agree. I'll defer to Superintendent Truitt on this, but I'm happy to work with the legislative liaisons, both the DPI and the state board, to see what the agency and board's timeline is for how quickly Pepsi would need to get those recommendations to them.
Yeah, we can talk about that offline, Tom.
Okay.
Patrick, I put some bullets in the chat as I listened to Tom do the presentation, and then looked at the different feedback sources. I don't know if I captured the right bullets that they have in common, but if the intent of this data that we've received is to inform those recommendations, I think we have a fairly clear, well identified set of bullets, whether or not we want to make those recommendations.
Right. So you did capture what I wrote down as the three areas: the licensure exam question, which there seems to be unanimity in not requiring an exam, defining the internship, and then defining the years of teaching, continuing license / requiring the MSA or the complete licensure program. So I think you captured those accurately.
And to Randy's, I agree with Randy's point. I don't think it would take long to synthesize this into a concise set of recommendations, and given when the General Assembly would need to have it in their hands. If it needs to come back to Pepsi because we don't do it today, I think it seems to me we could do this by the next meeting.
I would think so as well. Dr. Penfield, are you volunteering to chair that subcommittee?
I'm more than happy to do so.
I appreciate that. And do we have volunteers to serve with Dr. Penfield on this?
I'll help.
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, yes, or what?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll be glad to participate.
All right, thanks, Sam. So Dr. Penfield will chair, Dr. Dempsey and Dr. Houston. Any other participants?
I'm happy to. This is Marcy.
All right, Dr. Holland. All right, great. So hopefully you can convene a meeting, and I agree with Dr. Dempsey. This shouldn't take too long to get some formalized recommendations ready to bring back to the full commission in February.
Hi, this is Dr. Evans. I will send out a doodle poll as soon as possible today to get that process started.
Okay.
Great.
All right, so then we are ready to move on from the principal licensure recommendations, unless I hear more questions or comments. All right, Dr. Tomberlin, you're still up to discuss the TCED 004 EPP approval process for discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. And at the risk of wearing out my welcome, commission members, you were sent a recommended proposal for this as part of your board materials. In very recent conversations internally with DPI, we have recognized that recommendation is not going to be viable. So we have requested from Dr. Miller that we pull that recommendation for consideration and present to you our thinking on how to best proceed for initial authorization of EPPs in the state of North Carolina. And if we look at the current policy, there are two ways that is done, and that's through an approval process by the State Board of Education or national accreditation from CAPE. So with the board authorization, we had a process of a peer review in that, and we've had discussions about that peer review process in previous meetings, and we were looking for a way to eliminate any appearance of bias in that process, and so what we are currently thinking in the department, and we want to present to this commission for your thoughts and discussion, is as part of the approval by the State Board of Education process, we require accreditation by a national accrediting body. And right now, so CAPE is already there. And of course, if they have CAPE, they're automatically authorized. But if they don't have CAPE, then the process would be to apply to another national accreditation board, which is currently the only other one is AQEP, which has been recognized by the State Board of Education, and allow that accreditation process. If EPP is initially authorized on a probationary period by AQEP or CAPE, we would allow that entity to be presented to the State Board of Education for approval. And that's our recommended process for that, for the State Board of Education approval process.
Any questions or discussion for Dr. Tomberlin? I assume this one will come to us for action in February. Is that correct?
Yes, we will create a formal recommendation for the policy change for next month, but we wanted to make sure that at least the idea was presented to this group and get any feedback before drafting a formal policy recommendation.
Dr. Bullock, does this answer the concerns that you raised in the email with the questions?
It does. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Great.
I think this would be a fair, and I think the department was trying to do something that would eliminate any type of bias on their part. And so it's this would be a fair and a process that is adopted across most EPPs in North Carolina, even ones from outside. So I think this is an excellent solution, and puts it in a framework that allows for equity for everybody.
Excellent. Other questions or discussion? All right. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. You've been very busy today.
Thank you. Thank you, commission members, for your input.
Yes, thank you, commission members and advisors and staff, for your preparation for today's discussion. I remind you all that our next meeting will be held on Thursday, February the 10th, beginning at 9 o'clock. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Van.
Thank you, Van. Do we have a second?
Second, Connie.
Thanks, Connie. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.